So verse 6, so when the woman saw, okay, the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of the fruit and ate. And that was the downfall right there. And then it says, and then she gave to her husband with her, and he ate. All right? It says, then the eyes of both of them were open, and they knew they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves, notice that they made themselves coverings. So something happened here when they did this. And this is what scholars call original sin. This is where sin and death entered the picture. And if you remember, we were talking about dominion back a few sessions ago. And dominion is rulership. And what happened here is now life is now deposed and forfeits its position because they sinned against God with unbelief. All right? That doubt that we said, has God said, then the lie. They take, they eat, they sin against God in their unbelief. All right? And that is bears, searching out the whole faith versus unbelief. And we'll take a little bit of a look at that. And but they knew as soon as that happened, it was all good up to then. And that fruit, okay, it was the knowledge of good and evil. No, they only had good. So now they know evil. They are now experiencing evil. I don't know what it was like at that moment, okay? But we can only imagine as the profound effect of perfection, which we can't even imagine that. That perfection, all of a sudden, in a moment, as soon as they sin, boom, it's perfection already begins to deteriorate to some point where I like to think that the Bible talks about we'll have glory, okay? Glory is not, biblical glory isn't about telling stories about our old high school football games. Biblical idea of glory is when God would show up or angels would show up. It talks about their glory, and it means they literally would radiate and shine. And there's all kinds of cultures throughout the world where they talk about the star people and the shining ones. That I think that they had a glory, a light, a covering of light, which I believe that's what we'll have once we achieve our glorification when we get to heaven. And that will be restored. So the idea here of the glorification is that they lost that. And then they realized that they lost something. And what they thought they were going to gain, right? To make one wise, this tree, the allure here, the car salesman of the serpent here gets them to buy a lemon. Maybe it was a lemon, maybe it wasn't an apple, maybe it was a lemon that they ate. We don't know what it was, but it was probably more like a lemon. That they realized that they had lost something, and they became naked, and shame enters the picture. So this is the origin of death, the origin of shame, the origin of self-effort, because they try and clothe themselves. Now they're trying to make up, they're like, it's like you break your mom's vase, right? You're in trouble, all right? And you're trying to put it together, and it's just shattered. There's, you work for a little bit, and then you're just like, you know it's not going to work, so you turn the good end facing out this way, hoping that they won't see it here, and you know it's not going to happen. You're in trouble. And so we have the original fall. This is the fall and the sin of man. And Ezekiel 18, verse 20, it talks about the effects of sin. And what happened here, okay, is what died. They didn't physically die, because the chronology here says that Adam, and Eve lived for quite a while after this incident. So, but God said that in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Now, what happened, what died right then was their spirit. Their spirit man, their spirit, body, soul, and spirit, their spirit died. And the process of death began. This is probably where the laws of entropy are also introduced. So you can see how much, just in this little section here, how things are changing rapidly. And all of a sudden we have all these new problems of, evil being introduced, because they already knew what was good. Now they're beginning to learn firsthand on what the effects of evil are. So in Ezekiel 18, it talks about God was actually clarifying this with the prophets, and he was talking to the people, and they wanted to know the ways of the Lord. And he's basically telling them, the soul that sins shall surely die. Now, the soul is your desires and who you are. It's your personality, and I'm sure it's a lot more than what I can let you know. But that's the spirit man that needs to be revived, that died at that point. The soul that sins shall surely die. When the spirit dies, the spirit communicates with spirit. And in the Gospel of John, it talks about that God, Jesus says God is a spirit. And those who want to worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. So that spirit communicates with spirit, and God searches the deep things by his spirit in our spirit. And that was interrupted there at the garden. And Romans, at some point we'll do a full-blown study on the book of Romans. But if you read like the first 7 chapters, it's the Apostle Paul just makes this airtight argument that everybody's a sinner, okay, and that's just the process that's what we are. Cats meow, dogs bark, people sin. We all have that sin, fallen nature, and sin just means to miss the mark. God requires perfection, and nobody's perfect. In Romans 3:23, it says, "For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God." We're all going to come short. That's why, as you'll see here in Genesis chapter 3, God already has the plan of restoration in place, because God could have, he could have just taken them all out right there. He could have taken Adam out, Eve out, the serpent, and just started all over again. But what we'll see there's this process, because God has given us free will. We are free moral agents. Angels are also free moral agents. And angels learn because they don't have perfect knowledge, they don't have perfect revelation. Scriptures talk about how the angels desire to look into the things, and so they're learning about God's plan also, but they're learning it through what they're watching in us. They see God, we don't. So if an angel sins, he's damned for all eternity. There's no course of repentance for angels. So angels that enter into rebellion know their final destination.